It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day I married the love of my life, James. We had been together for 3 years, and after countless moments of shared joy, laughter, and love, he finally proposed. I couldn't wait to walk down the aisle and pledge my heart to him forever. The church was packed with family and friends, all dressed in their finest, buzzing with excitement. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers, and the soft hum of music from the string quartet added a layer of elegance to the setting. My heart raced with anticipation as I waited for the moment to step out into the sunlight, to take James' hand, and to start our life together. But as I stood backstage, adjusting my veil and taking deep breaths to calm my nerves, there was one thing that made me uneasy. My younger sister, Lily. Lily had always been complicated. She was the kind of person who thrived on attention, always the center of every room she entered. Growing up, she always had this effortless ability to charm everyone around her, including our parents, friends, and, at times, even my boyfriends. I loved her, of course, but there had always been a little tinge of jealousy when it came to her ability to steal the spotlight. Still, I never thought it would matter today. This was my day. I was marrying James, and nothing was going to take away the joy of this moment. But as I looked out from behind the curtains, I saw her standing near the front with the rest of the bridal party. Her eyes locked onto James, and I felt a sudden flutter in my chest. Something was wrong. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it lingered. I focused on the sound of the music, the excited murmur of guests, and tried to steady myself. Time had come. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the church, my heart pounding in my chest. The aisle stretched out before me like a dream, and I looked at James standing at the altar, his smile lighting up his face. Everything else blurred as I walked toward him, my eyes only on him. I was lost in the moment, lost in the love I thought would carry us through life together. But then something strange happened. I noticed Lily, her eyes fixed not on me but on James. Her smile, which was usually so bright and innocent, now held an unfamiliar intensity. Made my stomach churn. I shook it off. Had to. It was my wedding day. Nothing else mattered. But as I stood there, taking my place beside James, I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that had begun to settle deep within me. Lily wasn't acting like herself. There was something in her gaze, something in the way she looked at James, that made me uneasy. It was like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to step aside. The priest began the ceremony, and everything seemed to fall into place. I focused on James, on the vows we were about to make. But as I said my I do, my mind couldn't help but wander. Every time I glanced at Lily, she was looking at James, her gaze lingering for a fraction too long. My chest tightened. What was going on? As the ceremony continued, I began to brush off my suspicions, convinced it was just pre-wedding jitters. I couldn't let my insecurities overshadow this perfect day. But deep down a voice whispered, "Something isn't right." The wedding was over. The cake had been cut, the toasts had been made, and the music had echoed through the night. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and endless congratulations. But for some reason, as much as I tried to enjoy the celebration, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. James and I had just shared our first dance as husband and wife, and while the moment was magical, I couldn't ignore the strange tug in my chest every time I saw Lily. She was always near James, talking to him, laughing with him, and whenever I wasn't looking, I could see her eyes locked on him, a glint of something in them that I couldn't quite place. She was my sister and I trusted her. I thought I did. But why was I feeling this growing unease in my gut? At one point, I caught Lily brushing against James's arm a little too intimately as she passed him in the crowded ballroom. The gesture seemed innocent enough, but it struck me in a way I couldn't explain. Was I overthinking things? Was this just my jealousy rearing its head, a sisterly instinct to protect my bond with James? I decided to take a deep breath, to focus on the positives. It was our wedding day after all. James looked at me with those eyes that had always made my heart skip a beat. I had to trust him. But as the evening wore on and the drinks flowed, the doubts crept back in. I found myself watching them more closely. Every time James was near Lily, They shared inside jokes, whispered things in each other's ears, and laughed a little too freely. It wasn't just that they were being friendly, it was that intensity, that unspoken bond between them that felt too close. I brushed past them a few times, hoping my presence would break their private moments, but each time, it was as if they didn't even notice. I felt invisible. At one point I wandered outside to get some fresh air. The warm summer night was a welcome escape from the indoor chaos. I stood on the balcony, gazing out at the stars, trying to clear my head. My thoughts were a whirlwind. What was going on? Was it just me, or was I witnessing something more than just friendly sibling behavior? Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Lily standing there, her eyes scanning the horizon, her posture unusually tense. She glanced at me, offering a quick, almost nervous smile. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded, but there was something about her expression that didn't match her words. "Yeah, just needed some air." I studied her for a moment, noting how her fingers twitched as if she were anxious about something. Her gaze flickered over my shoulder, back inside the reception, where James was talking to some of the guests. I could feel the tension building between us. "You seem a little off," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Lily hesitated, her lips parted as if she was going to say something, but then she quickly closed them. There was an awkward silence between us before she finally spoke, her voice low. "I'm fine really," she said, her smile returning, though it didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into whatever was brewing beneath the surface, but before I could say anything else, Lily turned and walked back inside, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I was starting to piece things together. Something was happening between Lily and James, something I couldn't quite explain, but it felt like a betrayal, an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I danced with James, smiled for the camera, and pretended like everything was perfect, but inside I was falling apart. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that I was reading too much into their interactions, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something more. Was it possible that my own sister was making a move on my husband? It sounded crazy, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't imagining things. The night ended, and James and I made our way to the honeymoon suite. I couldn't shake the feeling of Lily's eyes watching us as we left, but I didn't bring it up to James. I wasn't sure if I could even confront him about my growing suspicions without sounding paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was starting to grow, one tiny, unsettling thought at a time. The days after the wedding should have been filled with joy, honeymoon bliss, and new beginnings. But instead, all I could think about was Lily and James. The small, quiet moments between them that had been lingering in my mind now felt like glaring red flags. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The feeling gnawed at me constantly, even when I tried to push it away. It wasn't just the little touches or the long conversations. They were too frequent. James, who had always been affectionate with me, now seemed distracted, often lost in thought, or laughing a little too much at Lily's jokes. And Lily, she was everywhere. It wasn't just the wedding night, it was every day after. Whether we were at family dinners, casual outings, or even at home, she seemed to gravitate toward James, always with a smile that looked a little too knowing, a little too confident. I tried to talk to James about it, but every time I started to bring it up, he'd either deflect the conversation or brush it off with a half-hearted explanation. "Lily's just being herself," he would say, or "she's just excited for us." But the excuses only made my suspicion grow. There was no way I was just imagining this. Something was wrong and I couldn't ignore it. The breaking point came one evening when James and I were sitting on the couch, enjoying a quiet night in. I had just gotten back from a work event and was feeling exhausted, but as I walked into the living room, I saw James and Lily standing close together by the window. Their heads were bent together as they whispered, their bodies just inches apart. I felt the world slow down as I saw James reach out and place a hand gently on Lily's arm. It was a simple gesture, but it was the kind of touch that held meaning. The kind of touch that wasn't meant for a sister-in-law. It sent a cold shiver down my spine, and before I could stop myself I blurted out, "What's going on between you two?" They both turned toward me, startled by my sudden outburst. Lily's face immediately flushed, but James, ever the calm one, put on a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing's going on, Em," James said, his voice tight. "We were just talking." But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, told me everything I needed to know. His voice lacked the usual warmth, and there was a slight edge to it that I hadn't noticed before. It was as if he was trying to convince both me and himself that nothing was wrong. I wasn't convinced. "You've been talking like this for weeks. You two are always together. There's something going on, James. I can feel it." Lily took a step forward, her eyes darting nervously between us. "Em, don't." But before she could finish, James spoke over her, his voice more insistent now. "You're imagining things. Lily and I are just close, and you know that. We've always been that way." Something inside me snapped. I had heard this all before. The excuses, the denial. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the clearer the truth became. I stepped forward, my voice shaking with a mix of hurt and anger. "You two are too close, James. It's not normal. I've seen the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. And I know you. I know what this is. I can't pretend anymore." There was a long, suffocating silence. I could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. Lily was looking at James now, her face twisted in something between guilt and frustration. It wasn't just the way they interacted, it was the way they avoided me, the way they kept me out. Finally, James dropped his gaze, and in that moment I saw it, the truth I had been afraid to admit. His expression faltered, his face softening as he sighed. "I'm sorry, Em. I should have told you earlier." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the air leave my lungs. I could feel my heart cracking, the pieces of my world shattering. "Tell me what?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. James hesitated, looking at Lily for a long moment, before turning back to me. I've been seeing Lily, Em. For a while now." The room spun. My mind couldn't process what he had just said. I wanted to scream, to yell at him, to ask how this had happened, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare at him, the man I had trusted more than anything in the world, standing there, admitting to the unthinkable. "How long?" I whispered. "A few months," he confessed, his voice heavy with shame. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My world, my life, was crumbling in front of my eyes. The man I loved, the man I had just married, had been secretly involved with my sister. My own sister. I turned to Lily, my eyes wild with disbelief. She looked guilty, her hands wringing together nervously. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. You and him." I stammered, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? You're my sister. You were supposed to be on my side." Lily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Em. It just did." But the words didn't comfort me. Nothing could. And then, just when I thought the world couldn't get any worse, she added, "I'm pregnant, Em. I'm carrying James's child." The room went silent. I couldn't hear anything but the rush of blood in my ears, the overwhelming nausea that twisted my stomach. The betrayal was suffocating. I had never felt more alone in my entire life. The silence that followed Lily's confession was deafening. The words hung in the air like thick fog, clouding everything around me. My head was spinning, my chest tight with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and gut-wrenching pain. How could this be happening? How could my own sister and husband betray me in the most unimaginable way? For what felt like an eternity, neither James nor Lily spoke. I couldn't even bring myself to look at them anymore. I just stared at the ground, my vision blurring with unshed tears that I was desperate to hold back. If I started crying now, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop. I took a step back, feeling the cold, sharp sting of betrayal deep in my bones. My voice came out shaky, weak, as I fought to regain control. I don't even know who you are anymore." The words barely escaped my lips, but they felt like they carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. James reached out toward me, his hand trembling, but I jerked away, unable to bear his touch. Please. No. I snapped, the anger bubbling up, hot and wild. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. He recoiled, his face filled with regret and something else, something I couldn't place. Maybe it was guilt, but it wasn't enough. Nothing could fix this. Not anymore. I had loved him, trusted him, and this is what I got in return. Lily, standing beside him, looked like a ghost, pale, wide-eyed, and on the verge of tears. I could see the struggle on her face, the conflict, but it didn't matter. There was no excuse for what she had done. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered, her voice shaking. I never meant for this to happen. I was confused. Confused. I laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow, empty. You slept with my husband, and now you're pregnant with his child, and you want to tell me you were confused? Lily opened her mouth to speak again, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't care about the reasons. The damage had already been done. I turned away from them both, walking toward the door, desperate to escape. I couldn't be here, couldn't be in this house where everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. Every room, every corner, held memories that now felt tainted, ruined. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. Before I could reach the door, James called after me, his voice pleading. Please don't leave. We can talk about this. We can fix it. Fix it. I whipped around, my voice rising with disbelief. How do you fix something like this? You've destroyed everything. My marriage, my family, everything. I felt tears start to sting at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not when they had already taken so much from me. I can't be around you right now. I choked out, my chest tight with pain. I need time. I need space. To think. To breathe. With that, I turned and fled out the door, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to get away from them. From everything. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at a friend's house, not wanting to face my family, my life, or the people who had shattered my world. The hurt was suffocating. There were no words that could fix what had happened, and there were no apologies that could make it better. I spent the next few days in a daze, alternating between anger and deep sorrow. I'd cry in private, then shut myself off from the world when anyone tried to comfort me. My friends tried to reach out, but I didn't want their pity. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, a broken shell of the woman I had once been. But as the days passed, the hurt began to evolve into something else. Something darker. Anger. Resentment. And the need for answers. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. I couldn't ignore what had happened, no matter how much I wanted to. Eventually I would have to face them, James, Lily, and my family. I would have to face the truth that my sister had not only betrayed me but that my husband had chosen her over me. Over the life we had built together. But for now I stayed away. I couldn't bear to speak to James. I couldn't look at him without feeling that unbearable weight of betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and I knew I couldn't live in this limbo forever. The anger burned within me, and I had to make a decision. Painful one. Would I ever be able to forgive them? Would I ever be able to heal from this? Could my family, my life, ever be the same again? The answers, I realized, would take time. And right now, I didn't know if I was ready to find them. The phone rang late one night, the sound cutting through the silence of the apartment I had been staying in. I had grown used to the solitude, the quiet that came with the isolation. It was safer this way. Away from the chaos, away from the reminders of the betrayal. But the phone ringing shattered that fragile peace. I stared at the screen, the name flashing in bold letters. It was James. For a moment I considered not answering. What more could he possibly say to me? What could he offer that would change anything? I had heard his apologies before, and they meant nothing. But as the phone rang on, I realized that avoiding him wouldn't make this go away. I needed closure. With a shaky breath, I swiped the screen and put the phone to my ear. His voice cracked through the line, low and hesitant. Please, can we talk? I didn't respond immediately. My pulse quickened as I stared out the window, watching the city lights blink in the distance. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand why. But another part of me, deep down, knew I needed to hear him out. Why? I finally said, my voice barely audible. Why, James? Why her? Why did you do this to me? There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought he might not answer. But then his voice came again, broken and raw. I don't have a good answer, Em. I don't have an excuse. But I was wrong. So wrong. I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to tear into him for what he had done, for the way he had made me feel so small, so unimportant. How long, James? How long were you and Lily? The question felt like it was burning my throat, but I needed to know. His silence was the answer. The way he faltered before speaking told me everything. A few months before the wedding, he said finally, the words like poison. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Just happened. I whispered, feeling my heart fracture with every word. You just happened to fall in love with my sister while we were planning our wedding? I didn't fall in love with her, Em, he said, his voice pained. But I was confused. I was feeling things I shouldn't have, and I didn't know how to stop it. How could you not know? I felt the anger welling up in my chest, and I couldn't keep it in any longer. How could you be so blind to what you were doing? You're supposed to love me, James. You promised me. I do love you, he said desperately. I never stopped loving you. But I made the biggest mistake of my life. I betrayed you in a way I can't take back. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, though it had no humor in it. And Lily? What about her? Did she not know that what she was doing was wrong? James hesitated, then sighed. I can't speak for her, Em. I don't know what was going through her head when all of this started. But I know that she feels guilty. She's not a villain. She didn't mean for this to happen. We both got tangled in something we shouldn't have. I felt like the room was spinning. I pressed my palm to my forehead, trying to steady myself. She's pregnant, James. Pregnant with your child. How do you expect me to just accept that? How do you expect me to move forward when everything I thought I knew is a lie? I don't know, he admitted, his voice small, defeated. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, Em. I just need you to know that I am so sorry. For everything. I never wanted to hurt you. Never. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the images that filled my mind. The vision of them together, laughing, sharing secrets behind my back. The more I thought about it, the more the anger built up inside me. But beneath that anger, a deep sense of loss settled in. It wasn't just the marriage that was shattered. It was the bond one had with my sister. With my family. I need space, I said finally, my voice low but firm. I need time to figure this out. I can't talk to you right now, James. Not like this. Em, please, he begged, but I cut him off. Goodbye, James. And with that I hung up. The finality of the action was something I hadn't expected. It was like closing a door I never wanted to shut, but I had no choice. There was no other way for me to protect myself from the pain he had caused. The next day, I sat in silence for hours, my mind racing. I knew I had to face Lily eventually. She was carrying James's child, and whether I liked it or not, she was a part of this mess now. But I didn't know if I was ready. How could I face her after everything? But I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to confront her, to hear what she had to say. To figure out where we went from here. So I called her. She picked up after a few rings, her voice shaky when she answered. Em. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. No, Lily. Everything is not okay. I need to talk to you. In person. There was a long pause and then finally she agreed. I'll come over. A few hours later I stood at the door, my heart racing. Lily was standing on the other side. Her expression nervous but determined. She looked different than the confident sister I once knew. Now she looked small, fragile, and deeply ashamed. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. You're pregnant with James's child, I said, the words hanging heavily between us. And I need to know everything. How did this happen? Lily's eyes welled with tears, and she bit her lip, clearly struggling to find the words. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Tell me the truth, Lily. No more excuses. She nodded slowly, then took a shaky breath. It was never supposed to happen this way. It started off as something small. Something I didn't understand. But when it happened I couldn't stop it. I thought I was in love with him too. And I didn't know what to do. I felt the anger boil again, but I forced myself to remain calm. You didn't know what to do. I repeated, incredulous. You didn't think about me? About what this would do to me? She shook her head, tears falling freely now. I'm so sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you. Love you. I love you and I wish I could take it all back. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I stood there in stunned silence, the weight of her words crashing down on me. Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever forgive any of them? The answer, I realized, was still unclear. The days that followed the confrontation with Lily were a blur of emotional turmoil. I felt as though I was drifting through life without a solid anchor. I couldn't shake the constant gnawing pain in my chest, the betrayal by both James and Lily hanging over me like an unshakable cloud. There were moments when I would catch myself thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could try to rebuild what was broken. That maybe I could find a way to forgive them both. But those thoughts were always fleeting, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the truth. Lily's words kept echoing in my mind. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. But how could I believe her? How could I trust anything she said after everything that had happened? And James? Every time I thought of him, every memory, every promise felt like a lie. I couldn't escape the weight of it all. The house I had once shared with James felt like a prison now. Every corner reminded me of the time we had spent together, the love we once shared. But now it all felt tainted. I couldn't walk through the rooms without feeling a deep, suffocating emptiness. I spent my days alone, avoiding contact with anyone who could remind me of the life I used to have. My friends tried to check in on me, but I shut them out. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Not until I could make sense of everything. Then one evening I received a message from James. The screen lit up with a simple text. Can we meet? It was followed by a second message. Please, Em. I need to explain. I need to make this right. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words seeming to burn into my eyes. The desire to respond, to ask him why, to demand answers was overwhelming. But I couldn't. Not yet. The anger, the hurt was still too raw, too fresh. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, thinking, contemplating what I needed to do. In the end, I realized that I couldn't keep living in limbo. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would just magically heal. Something had to change. I had to decide whether I was going to confront this head-on or walk away from it all. The next day I decided to go to the park. I needed to clear my mind. I needed to think, to breathe. The fresh air, the quiet moments under the canopy of trees, gave me a sense of peace that I had been desperately craving. As I sat on the bench, lost in thought, I saw a figure approaching from a distance. At first I didn't recognize who it was, but as they got closer, I saw it was James. He had that look in his eyes, the one that used to make me feel safe, loved. But now it just felt like a painful reminder of everything I had lost. He stopped in front of me, hesitating for a moment before sitting down beside me. His eyes were filled with regret, and his face was drawn, as though he hadn't slept in days. I never meant for any of this to happen, Em, he said softly, his voice raw. You have to believe me. I looked at him, feeling the anger rising again, but I kept my voice steady. Do you think I don't know that, James? Do you think I haven't heard it 1,000 times? That it wasn't planned. That it just happened. I know I hurt you, he said, his voice trembling. I know there's nothing I can say to make it right, but I need you to know I never stopped loving you. I was just confused, and I made the worst mistake of my life. His words hit me like a punch. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the image of him with Lily. It was impossible to escape. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. James's face fell, and he lowered his head, his hands resting on his knees. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just need you to know that I am so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I'll leave Lily. I'll do anything you want. But please don't shut me out completely. I stared at him, the words swirling in my mind. Leave Lily. Was that even a possibility? Could I ever believe him again after everything that had happened? The pain was overwhelming, and I couldn't bring myself to answer him. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him, if I could even look at him the same way again. I can't make a decision right now, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time. I need to figure this out on my own. James nodded. His eyes filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. He stood up slowly, hesitated for a moment, and then walked away without saying another word. I watched him leave, feeling the weight of the decision hanging over me. Could I really move on from this? Could I truly rebuild a life with James? Or was it too broken to fix? Later that night I sat alone in my apartment, thinking about the future. I thought about James, about Lily, about the baby that was now a part of my reality. There were so many emotions swirling inside me. Betrayal, confusion, hurt, anger. But there was also something else. Something I hadn't expected, hope. I didn't know if I could ever forgive them. I didn't know if I could ever fully heal from this betrayal. But what I did know was that I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to make a choice. And in that moment I realized something. I was the one who had the power. I didn't have to accept the life that had been thrust upon me. I could choose my path. I could decide what I wanted, whether that meant letting go of the past or trying to move forward with James and Lily. The decision would be mine. And no matter what, I would make it with my heart, not my anger. The days following my conversation with James were a whirlwind of thoughts, emotions, and sleepless nights. It felt as if time had slowed down, dragging me through every painful moment of the betrayal. I couldn't escape the constant reminders, the questions that kept racing through my mind. Could I forgive them? Could I ever trust James again, knowing the depth of his actions? And then there was Lily. My sister, who had once been my closest ally but now felt like a stranger. I tried to throw myself into work, focusing on my career, distracting myself from the emotional chaos. But even there my mind wandered. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. About James. About Lily. About the future that seemed so uncertain now. Then one evening I got a message from Lily. It was short, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again, but I couldn't avoid it forever. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. When Lily arrived, I could see that she had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her posture slumped as if the weight of everything had crushed her spirit. For the first time in a long while, she looked like the vulnerable younger sister I had once protected. But now it was clear that she was the one who needed protecting. From herself. I'm so sorry, Em, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've ruined everything. I know there's no way to fix this, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I watched her, the sister who had once been my best friend, standing before me as a stranger. There was pain in her eyes, but there was also a sense of guilt, a deep remorse that I hadn't seen before. I don't even know where to begin, she continued, her voice breaking. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't know if I can ever make up for them. But I want you to know that I love you, Em. I always have. And I never wanted any of this to happen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The emotions swirling inside me were overwhelming. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand why she had done this. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her unconditionally, just wanted to listen. I wanted to understand why. How could you, Lily? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How could you betray me like this? How could you sleep with my fiancé and not think about me? About what this would do to me? Lily hung her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't have an answer, Em. I don't know what I was thinking. I was selfish, and I hurt you in the worst way possible. But I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. It was hard to hear her words, harder still to see her like this. But the pain, the betrayal was still fresh. I couldn't just let it go. Not yet. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Lily, I said softly, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You were my sister. And you betrayed me. Lily nodded, the sorrow in her eyes deepening. I understand, Em. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, even if it means losing you forever. For a long moment, we both sat in silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air between us. The tension was unbearable, the emotional distance between us more profound than ever. Finally I spoke, my voice steady but firm. I need time, Lily. I need space to figure out what I want. I need to process everything to understand how I feel. Lily nodded again, wiping her tears away. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here if and when you're ready to talk. Just please know that I'm truly sorry. As she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. The bond we had shared was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. But in that moment I realized something. No matter how much I wanted to go back to the way things were, I couldn't. I had to move forward, even if that meant leaving the past behind. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I kept my distance from both James and Lily, trying to focus on myself, on my own healing. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought I was beginning to move on, the pain would come rushing back. The memories of James's touch, his laughter, the life we had planned together. All of it felt like a dream that had been violently ripped away from me. But slowly I began to realize something. I couldn't keep punishing myself for what had happened. I couldn't keep holding on to the anger, the resentment. It wasn't helping me heal. It was only dragging me further down. And so I made a decision. A decision that would change everything. One afternoon I called James. It had been weeks since we had spoken, and I was nervous, unsure of what I would say. But I knew I needed to talk to him. I couldn't avoid it any longer. When he answered, his voice was full of hesitation. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, James. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I do know that I can't keep living like this. I need closure. For me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft but filled with emotion. I understand him. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want you to be okay. We agreed to meet, and when I saw him again, I was struck by how much he had changed. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, as though the weight of everything had been wearing him down. I don't know what the future holds for us, James, I said, my voice trembling. But I need to figure out who I am again. I need to rebuild my life without you. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I understand. And I'll always be here. I'll never stop loving you. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let their mistakes define me. I wasn't going to let the betrayal of my sister and my fiancé take away my sense of self. I was going to move forward. On my own terms. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to forgive. But that would take time. And I was willing to take all the time I needed. The months that followed my final conversation with James were some of the hardest of my life. There was no magical moment where everything just fell into place. Healing wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past threatened to swallow me whole, and there were moments of doubt when I wondered if I had made the right decision. But with each passing day, I began to find a little more peace. I focused on myself, on the things that I loved and that made me feel alive. I spent more time with friends who lifted me up, who reminded me of the person I was before all of this. I poured myself into my work, rediscovering the passion and drive that had always been a part of me. And slowly, the sharp edges of the pain began to dull. One day, I was walking through the park where I had met James months ago, when I saw Lily. She was sitting alone on a bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes distant as if lost in thought. The sight of her brought a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, and a deep longing for the sister I once knew. But now, I didn't feel the same desperation to make things right. I had moved forward, and I wasn't going to look back. I took a deep breath and walked over to her. She looked up in surprise, her face softening when she saw me. She whispered, her voice fragile. I never thought I'd see you again. I sat down beside her, not knowing exactly what to say, but feeling that the time had come to have this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Lily, I said quietly. About us. And about the past. Lily nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I don't blame you for hating me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, even if I've hurt you in ways I'll never be able to undo. I looked at her for a long moment. There was a time when I would have immediately run to her, comforted her, tried to fix everything. But now I was different. I had changed, and I had learned that some things couldn't be fixed, no matter how hard we tried. I'm not ready to forgive you, Lily, I said gently. But I'm not angry anymore. I think I just need time. Time to heal. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes. I just hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging between us. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether we would ever be close again, whether we would ever heal fully. But for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. As the months passed, I found a new sense of purpose in my life. I didn't need to cling to the past, to the people who had betrayed me. I was free to build something new for myself, to become the person I had always been meant to be. James, too, had moved on. He reached out a few more times, but each time I told him I wasn't ready to talk. And in the end, he respected my wishes. We both had to face the consequences of our actions and move forward in our own ways. The last time I saw him was in passing. He was with someone new. Someone who looked at him the way I once had. There was no bitterness, no anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement that our time had come and gone. I eventually moved to a new city. Fresh start. I met new people, made new friends, and found new opportunities. And though I still thought about James and Lily from time to time, the pain faded more and more with each passing day. One day, while walking through the streets of the city, I stopped at a small cafe. It was there that I met someone who would change everything for me. His name was Ethan. He was kind, compassionate, and he saw me, really saw me, in a way I had never been seen before. With him I found a love that was patient, understanding, and most importantly, healthy. Ethan didn't try to fix me. He didn't try to erase the scars left by James and Lily. Instead, he held space for my pain and supported me as I healed. With him, I learned that it was possible to love again, without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. Years passed, and as I stood on the edge of the city, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I had finally moved on. The past was behind me. I had healed. I had become whole again. And while I would never forget the pain, I had learned to forgive myself for allowing it to consume me for so long. I had taken the power back into my own hands, And in doing so, I had found peace. The end.